How's it, Schticklers? The Joystick Show is back to talk story about things we've read, watched, or played. Shakas Mahalas for sticking around. If you fancy what you hear, please like and subscribe on the platform you frequent. I'm your co-host, Drake, and that's Thomas.
Moshi Moshi.
And today we have a very, very, very special guest, a Derick McDuff.
The Joystick Show. The Joystick Show.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So yeah, Derek, why don't you tell us about Underrated?
Yeah, so my podcast that I do is called Underrated Movie Podcast, which, as people might be able to guess, it's about underrated movies. You've been on it, Thomas. That was a really great episode. I always tell people to listen to that one. But yeah,
Ah, shucks. Thanks, buddy.
but yeah, it's a lot of fun. I get to talk about movies that wouldn't really be normally talked about on other podcasts. Right now, I'm starting a mini series called Extended Editions, where I'm talking about director's cuts or alternate cuts of films that are underrated because it's like, oh, maybe you saw the theatrical version of Kingdom of Heaven, but guess what? The director's cut is way better. So working on that right now. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. So just look up Underrated Movie Podcast on any of the podcast apps, however you're listening to this, and it's on all the social medias. So that's where Underrated lives.
That's awesome.
Yay.
Do you think, in your perspective now, just briefly, are the director's editions usually better than the theatrical cuts?
Yes, I would say almost always. I feel like the director's cuts or the assembly cuts or the editor's cuts, they're almost always better than the theatrical versions you're going to see. Maybe with the exception of the Star Wars special editions, but other than that, I think pretty much every single time they're going to be a better version on that because it's the version that those are kind of usually the true versions. I feel like.
Yeah.
Mm.
Why do we even have theatrical versions then at that point? It's like just give us the director cut from the start. We're looking at
Right.
Rebel Moon, part one and part two.
That's the one that doesn't make sense because it's like, oh, in theaters, I get why, like, okay, well, the studio was pushing Ridley Scott to push it down so they get more showings in a day. But if it's on Netflix already, it doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't know. I guess it extends people's membership for like one more month or a couple
Right,
more months
yeah,
or
it's just
something
another
like
thing
that.
to sell them, yeah.
Yeah. So today we're talking about Shogun. We talked about it all season, and this is a very special episode for us because we're just focusing on the season as a whole and a little bit of the finale. And what did you guys think overall for this limited series, Shogun on FX? Drake?
Uh, I want to say it's probably one of the best uh, showings of Japanese culture in that time period. That isn't too much about the fighting as much as it is about the actual characters and the events and the behind the scenes and the, spycraft, et cetera, et cetera. Shogun's definitely one of the top shows I've seen this year, if not all time in my life. So,
Damn.
that's what I would say.
That is high praise. That's really high praise. What about you, Derek?
Yeah, I loved this show too, and I want to say right now, I feel like the Anjin right now because it's like me, the white guy, coming on with you guys with your Japanese heritage, talking about this show.
Anjin dono,
My name is Backthorn,
irashaimase.
Yeah.
But yeah, I dug this too. I thought this was really phenomenal. One of the best written, one of the best acted, one of the best looking shows in recent memory. This looks better than 95% of theatrically released movies. I'm always
Preach.
a really big right, and I'm always a big fan of the miniseries format. It's just something that it was really popular. I feel like the 80s and 90s, and then it kind of went away for a little while, but it really came back with a vengeance. And the last maybe 10, 15 years, this rise of prestige dramas and in the 10 episode format. And I can't. It's hard. I'm hard pressed to think of one that did it better than this. And obviously, this is the second version of the Shogun. There was also a mini series in the 80s. I haven't seen that. I've read a little bit about it. But yeah, this one seems like it's probably like at least to me, seems like the definitive version. And like you said, Drake, not a lot of fighting in this, but I really like the way that they subvert your expectations. You're expecting there to be like this big crimson sky, and then he's just like, in almost like
It's
a
already
supervillain
happened.
speech, he's just like, yeah, I executed Crimson Sky already. It's almost like Matthew Good at the end of Watchmen. So yeah,
Yeah.
in phenomenal show, and there's a reason I begged you guys to let me be on this episode.
Yeah, no, we wanted you here because we were talking about it kind of throughout the season, and you're like, this episode, and you're like, man, it's so beautifully shot, and everything you just said, to both your guys' points, I mean, just incredibly, incredibly well done. I think when we think about prestige TV, we think about like HBO. And, coming from FX, that's had really good shows. This, I feel like, is a whole new stratosphere for FX as a network. And I know they've been putting out great things like Fargo and I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I was going to have a long list, but that's about it. No, American Horror Story.
One
that kind of
thing
stuff.
long. Okay.
The Americans, I gotta shout out The Americans.
Oh, Americans,
One of my
I know.
favorite shows of all time.
Okay, I never watched that yet. I think I missed the boat on it, and then I was like, I'm too far gone. But I constantly hear about the Americans being brought up as an incredibly well done, well shot, well acted show. And but this, I feel like, I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like this is hitting a whole nother level. I know that this was the most expensive show that FX has ever done, well into, I think, the 7 figures, I want to say,
It
or
shows.
more.
Yeah, it really
Yeah,
does.
but it does. You're right. And you could see it from them having to build the whole set, building 3 individual little cities in Canada because they couldn't shoot in Japan during COVID. So this is just, man, it's just so beautiful. So before we get too much farther, or someone could take it away, I'm going to just kind of quickly name out all the episodes. Any other thoughts before we move on to kind of some episode breakdowns?
I
I
guess
wonder-
my only real thought, is that this is what happens when you put both a lot of, well, 3 things: a lot of time, a lot of talent, and a lot of money into a show. You mentioned the money. This is really expensive. We mentioned the talent. All of these incredible actors in this, including one of my favorite actors of all time, Hiroyuki Sanada. Forgive my probably not pronouncing that right, but he's so incredible in
Wonder
this.
Merit. No, no, that was pretty dang good actually.
Thank you. But yeah, everybody's so good in this. And then also, like you said, they were shooting this during COVID. And unlike regular TV, a miniseries really can take their time. They really put a lot of time and effort into this. They wasn't like trying to hit deadlines or anything. They worked on this for years. In the way that, if you're doing a TV show where you have to pump out a season a year, you're not going to be able to put in the time investment that you would for something like this.
Yeah, I agreed. I agree. They definitely got to just breathe and live in it, and yeah, and 100% shows. Limited series, man. I feel like, they're kind of sometimes better than a movie because you get to live with these characters, and there were so many great characters in this show. Episode 1 actually starts off with the Anjin. We know it's Blackthorn, played by Cosmo Jarvis, and it's about him and the rest of his Dutch sailors landing in the Japans, as he says.
Japans.
Exactly.
I like how we both did that.
Yeah, I know, that was pretty
We're on the
sick.
same page.
There you go. So yes, we kind of start with him, and he lands in the Japans and is quickly thrust with the rest of his crew into, being a prisoner and into Japanese culture right away. Yeah, let's see from there. Unless you guys have anything to say about that, I might just going to list them all off. Episode 2 is called Servant of Two Masters. It's Blackthorn's arrival into Osaka, and it says that it stirs up the hornet's nest of rivalries. We also see that Mariko is trapped between her cause and her faith. Now in episode 3, it's called Tomorrow, and Blackthorn survives a brazen assassination attempt. And this, for me, was the turning point in the show where I was like, holy shit, this is serious. And it wasn't the guy getting boiled, which was gnarly too, but this also showed a level of Toranaga being able to back up things with force. So, episode 4 is the Eightfold Fence, which Drake broke down beautifully throughout the season, and I think we'll be able to elaborate on it even more. Actually, Drake, do you kind of want to explain the idea of the Eightfold Fence and maybe even how it related to this show?
Yeah, generally it's like the person you are is within that eightfold fence. And having to deal with the culture and the practices, the traditions, et cetera, you kind of have to have these walls per se to be able to kind of keep your own sanity. You see it a lot with Mariko, you see it a lot with the early seppuku and harakiri situations, just because of kind of the emotions they had to tie to, oh, this is serving my lord, even though they're losing loved ones, even though they're having to give their own lives for certain things. So in that, there's also other ways to interpret it in terms of, having a strong inner belief in yourself and your own understanding and being able to kind of have those shields up, which is kind of the same thing, but just differently.
Yeah. There is some part of me that thinks of the Eightfold Fence as a way, not only does it protect you internally, but it also, yeah, I think you said, like, it's a wall, it keeps people out, but also in a way that is structural and relevant to your culture. But in doing
Mm,
so, it also protects you and who you are. I think the other side to it, too, is we see that it also can trap you in itself. And
yeah.
I feel like no better example of this in this season was Mariko.
Mm, agree,
So,
agree.
yeah. So, yeah, that was the idea of Eightfold Fence.
Very cool.
In episode 5, we have Broken to the Fist. Blackthorn and Mariko struggle to contain the secret that could get them both killed. Yabashige searches for a spy who has betrayed his intentions to Lord Toranaga. And I feel like it's crazy that we haven't mentioned Yobashige already, but what a character. We'll dive more into it, but just kind of general thoughts on Yobashige as a character this season.
I mean, yeah, he's such a it's like, oh, that scamp, he's just boiling people alive. What a rascal that Yabushige. Like you kind of can't help but love him, even though he's such just a rat bastard. But you're kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
what a scamp. He's letting the assassins in. Oh, this guy, he's at it again.
Right.
He was the cause of like a lot of stress because his character is very lovable and relatable, but the way that his actions made me feel was like I was watching Uncut Gems.
Ooh, good example.
Yeah.
That, yeah,
Ugh.
totally. He's so frustrating and so, yeah, drove so much tension in this show. He's so great. We'll dive more into him later. Now, in episode 6, we get to Ladies of the Willow World, and it's about Lady Ochiba. She returns to Osaka in order to accelerate the region's campaign against Toranaga. In Onjiro, Toranaga tests Mariko's loyalty to his cause. Yeah, I don't know if we need to say more about that. We'll kind of dive more into Ochiba and the way Toranaga tests Mariko throughout this season. We also, in episode 7, get a stick of time. And again, this was something that I thought you described so well, Drake. Can you kind of break down what that term means or phrase means?
Which term in particular?
A stick of time.
Oh, a stick of time. Yes. So as you saw, um, the headmistress talking to Toranaga, Toranaga lit an incense or what we call a senko, and typically those are used for timers, but they're also used to like represent and respect the dead. So when you're going to the altar, you're putting in a senko, you're lighting it, clasping your hands and bowing and silently praying to yourself and to the ancestor and or the loved one. So in that kind of a very beautiful way to interpret kind of a moment in time.
Got it. Yep. Well said. And I think I love that they're using these terms that are very significant to Japanese culture, but are also really titling these different chapters or episodes. And they're so relevant to how the story is progressing. So I just think that was so awesome. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Derek?
I mean, yeah, like this is another great episode of TV. I'm really glad to because I'm coming into this with a very limited understanding of Japanese culture and stuff other than what I've just gone through osmosis. So it's really cool that you guys because I'm like, oh, cool, this is a cool like timer thing, and that yeah, getting the context from you guys is really awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I agree. I learned a ton from Drake, and even though I'm Japanese, Drake is the historian. He's the expert for me, and I think for all of us on this podcast when it comes to Shogun, which now leads us into episode 8, which is the Abyss of Life, and I believe this is the episode where it's right after Nagakado, Toranaga's son, had just died, and it's kind of some of the ramifications of that. Where I think it says Toranaga defeats the clan and moves to Edo and awaits their fate. Blackthorn must decide who he fights for, the lord who has turned his back on him, or the ambition that brought him to Japan in the first place. And I think this is where he tries to align with Yobashige. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And
Mm.
this is also the episode 2 where finally gets to see his crew, because he's always like, I must get back to my ship. I must get back to the Erasmus and my crew, you know. And
Yeah.
he finally does see them. Like, he sees that guy drunkenly kind of stumble out, and he realizes, I don't really belong with these guys anymore. Like, he's like, I'm
Mm.
not really, he's like, I'm not like, I'm an outsider here in Japan, but I would be an outsider back in the culture that I came from too. So he
Yeah.
realizes kind of he's it's like the stranger in a strange land thing, where it's just like, I'm kind of torn between places. Maybe this is the place that I belong, and this is where I'll maybe he will never leave the Japans, as we kind of might find
The
out later.
Japans.
The
Yeah.
Japans.
Definitely. Yeah, that scene really struck home for me that, yeah, he's not the same person that we first see him in episode 1 or 2, or even 3 for that matter. Now, in episode 9, we finally get Crimson Sky, and at least that's the name of the episode, or it's not in the way that we thought. And we find out more reasons why in episode 10. But in this one, we see that Mariko arrives in Osaka for the fight of her life. As the invading army quickly approaches, Blackthorn and Yobashige scramble to save their own heads as their options are dwindling. So this for me was, I think, my favorite episode of the whole series. I really liked how everything had culminated at this point. I really thought it was great how you see this change in Blackthorn, even in Yobashige, the way he treats him in the early episodes, even though Blackthorn saves his life from the cliff. This is just a whole 180. And we also at this point still think that Toranaga has given up. He's like, he can't do it. He's lost all will. I think he's about to just give up to the regents and I don't know, have to like commit seppuku in front of the rest of them. I don't know.
Yeah.
This one just hit home for me so much, and I felt like it was the culminations of so many things, and it had, sadly, a ton of action in it too at the end that I really dug. So yeah, I really loved this episode. Did you guys have any thoughts on the penultimate episode?
I just really like the resemblance, the symbolism of it all. Like the one interpretation of the Crimson Sky is like that was Mariko's destiny all along. And to have it culminate in that kind of way where we have relief, like, oh my God, Mariko, our favorite character, she's gonna make it. And she makes it in a way where there's purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a little while at least.
Yeah, yeah,
I will say, yeah, I think this is like episode 9 is not just my favorite episode of the show, but I think it's one of the best episodes of TV of the 21st century. Like, it's, I think,
Damn.
incredible. Like, just the through line that we see through with her and Blackthorn. We haven't really talked on it much, but there is a really intense, just like sometimes unspoken love story that it has a lot to do with like her as the translator and language and what's said and what isn't said, and their cold dynamic. And it finally it finally kind of it's implied that they did hook up before this, but it's implied that like this is when they really come together. And I love that she's basically about to sacrifice herself, and when he agrees to second her, like that's such a powerful moment. And then when they get together, you're like, good for her. All right, good. Mariko getting some. All right, and then that ending is just so heartbreaking and powerful, and just the way that it like hard cuts with the explosion. Man, like it's a really really powerful episode that I've just been thinking about nonstop since I watched it.
Wow. Yeah, well said,
Been
man.
on your mind.
Yeah, it delivers so much for her character, and I love how it really highlights her as a main character even more, like how important she was to the entire story. We see it even more in episode 10, A Dream of a Dream, especially when we think we're going to get, or when you would normally get, a giant CGI massive battle,
Mm.
people clashing, just, and the episode very well could have just been that for 45 minutes with some preamble, with something at the end. But we see that Toranaga has been playing 4D chess and has been setting pieces in place the entire season, and
Mhm.
that ultimately doesn't need to happen. So I think we've done a really good job of kind of highlighting some interesting things through each episode. But I want to take this moment to really dive into some of the themes throughout this season. And again, whether it's, the person outside of their culture, the foreigner in a foreign land, the idea of adapting a culture, the idea of pride and honor, the idea of Eastern culture mixing with Western culture, like all of these different things. Yeah, what stood out to you? And if there's something you already named, what can we elaborate on?
I mean, I would just say that yeah, I think that you're expecting this episode and the last episode, because the last episode is called Crimson Sky, and then when there isn't like this big battle, you're like, okay, well, I guess it's coming in the final episode, and
Yeah.
then like about halfway through the episode, you're like, there doesn't seem to be a lot of time left in Shogun. What's going on?
Yeah.
And they
How
because
fast is
they
this battle gonna be? Like, is it just gonna be a one-on-one with Ashido and Toranaga, or like what's going on here?
Bunkai.
right, but they really pulled the rug out from you, and then just I think that what this show did best was all these, all there was all the dynamics and stuff like that it's people have compared a lot to Game of Thrones, and really I feel like Game of Thrones, the book series owes a lot to Shogun, the book, because the book came first, obviously, and it's all about political machinations and plans within plans and different clans and different factions being aligned. And if this person does this, then this person will go to your side. There's a lot of that that's really interesting, but all the people are the ones behind that, and I love
Mm.
the interactions between all the people, and there's so much great stuff of that in this. Even though by now Mariko is dead, I think that you really feel her presence so much in this episode, and Blackthorn just kind of grieving her, and I love that it does like that fake out where you think he's back in England, and then it just real you realize by the end like, oh no, that's not real. And when him and Fuji, who is also like kind of low key one of the best characters on the show, they that last it's like the second last scene when they go out on that boat, and because you like the first time you see her in like episode one, she has to like her kid and her husband are being put to death, her infant child, and
Yeah.
there's that line that someone says like, let her hands be the last to hold them.
Yeah,
And
Mariko says it to her in the first episode.
Mm.
yeah, and then when after they dump the ashes and he's holding Marco's cross, which is basically like kind of like you know symbolic of her, and she says to him, let your hands be the last to hold her, and he drops it in the water. uh, uh you know that got me. That I was like, I was done. I was like, all right, start the waterworks. Like I it was and then you just kind of get that right after that. You get that really powerful kind of ending where Bintaro comes back, and they're pulling the Erasmus out, um and it just shows like uh, uh you know him looking out onto the ocean, and it just says Shogun, and you're like, boom, oh wow, perfect ending.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really impressive. I mean, the fact that it was really the genesis of him becoming the shogun, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that in itself kind of subverts the expectation of, like in Game of Thrones, you literally see these characters take on the throne. They become the
Mm-hmm.
king of the realm. But in this, it's like all the seeds are planted. Every step has been put in place because of what these characters have done, some of their sacrifices. Everybody's had sacrifices in one way or the other. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even Toranaga, Blackthorn, possibly are probably never seeing his family again, never leaving the Japans, like all of that stuff. I mean, they've all have sacrificed in one way or the other. Yeah, Drake, what were your thoughts on A Dream in a Dream, or yeah, just some of the themes that popped up this season?
Uh, the thing that stood out the most was when Mariko is like as continues to kind of repeat the concept that both life and death can bring value and purpose. And I think throughout Blackthorn's just very confused by this, and there's that culmination of slowly seeing what that means. And throughout the show in itself, there's a lot of seppuku or harakiri, which is essentially ritualistic suicide. And for the necessity of a greater good that may be beyond them, the most selfless thing you could possibly do. And in A Dream of a Dream, us as the viewers, if we haven't or if we're not familiar with that kind of custom or idea, because it's very hard to think about a loved one taking their life for something, right? Because they're loved. And Mariko's whole existence proves throughout not only the episodes but in the finale is that life can both have purpose and meaning, because everything that we see in episode 10 is all of the things that culminated not only through Toranaga's planning, but also the sacrifices of each of the people who believed and loved in him.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, very well put.
Man, Mariko, hands down, one of my favorite characters throughout this season. She had such a subtle way of kind of entering with really strong, really powerful entrance into the show again. And yeah, from Fuji interacting with her and how Toranaga brings her in as counsel and then uses her skills as a translator. But man, Anna Sawai just did a masterful job and was able to act, whether it was in English or whether it was in Japanese, like just her delivery on everything, the subtleness of her acting was like, it's just top notch. She's so damn good. I don't know why I haven't seen her in more things, but she just absolutely crushed it. And I think for sure she's probably one of my favorite characters. Another character that I hated at first, I kind of despised him, was Blackthorn or the Anjin. I was like, this guy's a piece of shit. He doesn't get it. Like, he's just coming in here, complete barbarian. And he was kind of this crazy savage. But by the end of it, I don't know about you guys, but he really won me over. Where he had fully kind of submitted not only to the culture, but he had adapted himself and then to Mariko and her beliefs and what she really wanted, putting her above himself. And he even says to her before he's about to second her, he said, he says, why don't you live for me? If you don't do it for your religion or for your culture, like, do it for me. And him at that moment saying, yeah, I'll second you. It was just, damn, that really hit for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like their whole dynamic is so fascinating. All the back and forth, and I already talked about like the language and stuff like that. But when he chooses to second her, like that's such a powerful moment. And then after she's died, and when he shows up, he's basically kind of like this. I wouldn't say religious zealot, but like he is fighting like a religious war. Like he's just like, it's not that even he like cares so much about his religion. He just like hates the Catholics. He's just like, I came to Japan to chew bubble gum and kill Catholics, and there's no bubble gum in Japan. So like,
right.
So, but by the end of it, he's like, he doesn't even care at all about that. He's like, oh yeah, my war is like a small war. He says to Toranaga at the end.
That's a great call out.
And yeah, so he just like, he's kind of completely, changed his like alliances, his ideals. And then, when he says that last rites after Mariko is dead, he doesn't say, I don't even think he necessarily believes it. And he has that speech to the I forget the character's name, the monk, whatever. He's like, he's like, not to my God or to your God, just to God. Like, and that's such a powerful moment. And because he's not doing it for himself or for anyone else. And even though Mariko's dead, he's doing it for her and her like sacrifice. You talked about her being pulled between her duty and like, this kind of all these Japanese traditions and then her Christian faith. And I think that all really comes to a head when she has to, basically she's like, I know my duty is to commit seppuku. I'm sorry. But kill herself.
And it's tricky. It's a tricky one. There's extra P in there.
And which means that according to because she's going to cut her throat, and if there's no one there to second her, according to her faith, she's going to be sent to hell. And and there's originally the Christian Lord is supposed to be the one to second her. Blackthorn doesn't want to kill her because he loves her, but he agrees to do it because he's like, he doesn't necessarily believe she's going to go to hell, but he's like, I can't be the one who's going to like send you to like I'm going to spare you that. He's like, and he has that great line where he says, I've been to hell. I don't want you to go there. Like I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Damn. Yeah. So damn good. Yeah. I found the name too. Is Father Martin Alvito.
Yeah. He's a fascinating character. Because he's also like like a lot of the stuff that he shows up in like Miracle's flashbacks where he's like, I've also been through some trauma. They've clearly like care about each other, and I love that last scene that him and Blackthorn have where he's like, I think that Mariko would be really happy to see us like this, and it's like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, in the forest. Because in the earlier parts of the show, I don't know if it was episode 2 or 3, they're walking through the forest and they try to kill them. You know, and it's like, at that moment, I don't remember if that was from the Catholics or that was the Shido's men. But either way, like, there was a trap there. And now seeing where they're at and seeing that they're kind of at this place where they understand each other, I thought that was really fascinating. It wasn't just, like, Western culture versus Eastern culture. It was like also the mixing of different religious cultures in Europe at that time too, and how those wars had stretched so far and didn't even mean anything at the end of the day to the people who were so far detached from the source. You know, it kind of all got thrown out the window. He was a fascinating character. I liked how they used him in a bunch of different ways too, as a translator, but also like showing how he was planning on his side of things to kind of make what's best for the Catholic Church, and ultimately gets put next to the tea house, and the look of defeat on his face when he finds out that he's across from the tea house was just so classic. That was just perfect.
Yeah, that was a really cool moment because he's just like, oh, I'm supposed to be tolerant, but I'm really pissed off about this.
yeah. What were we gonna say, Drake?
I was gonna say, I mean, hopefully he gets a lot of turnover because they'll be going to the tea house and going back over, you know?
Yeah.
Commit some sins, get forgiven. Yeah, there you go.
Back and forth. It's an infinite cycle of money.
Yeah, there you go. And of religious guilt.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. One character that we really haven't touched on too much is Toranaga himself, where ultimately, you know, is such a strong character. You mentioned it, Suniki. I can't even say it. Drake, fill it in here really quick.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Why am I? I've said this all season 5, and now I can't say it.
Hiroyuki Sanada.
Hiroyuki Sanada. Thank you. Yeah, Drake, take it away on your thoughts about Toranaga himself this season.
I mean, Hiroyuki does a really great job. He's an historian. He wants it to be, you know, as close to exact as possible within the realm, obviously, in terms of making sure the language is tight, in the inflections that they spoke with at the time, making sure that there's a very high view of Japanese culture. And he is a character based off of Ieyasu Tokugawa, which is from 1543-1616, the Edo period in Japan at the time. And to kind of give you a lot of historical context within the Japans at that time, and for Hiroyuki to be able to bring it in and really bring it home. I mean, without his effort, I mean, I don't know that the project would be anything what it is now. So I mean, Hiroyuki is the hero of the show in itself.
Yeah, because I think that this show, and I think that the book and maybe the original 80s miniseries did fall into the trap of like kind of making it a little bit of a white saviory thing where it's like, or even the thing where it's like, even if he's not a white savior, of the like here's this culture, and then we just make the white guy the main character.
Right.
Where it feels like Sanada is kind of like he's the titular shogun, like this is his show. And Blackthorn is like a very important character, but he feels like he's on equal footing with him and Mariko and all of these other characters. And Sanada is a producer on this show. I think that this show was very careful to be very sensitive to all of that stuff and to do all the right things in making this. With the 80s one, I think that they did. They made, whenever there was Japanese, it wasn't subtitled, which kind of really put you in Blackthorn's perspective of being like, oh, I'm in this weird land, I don't understand anything. all I'm getting is from Mariko. But like then it's just a show about him, whereas this is like a much bigger Game of Thrones esque show with all of these different moving pieces and stuff like that. You have council meetings and all these people talking and all these different machinations and the way I saw somebody put it was that he's basically Toranaga is basically if Ned Stark was smart, and I thought that was pretty good.
Exactly. Well, I like that. I think that's kind of hits it on the head, but it's like Ned Stark if he wasn't just trying to be a good guy. If he really was trying to
Yeah,
do, like if he was going to try to save the realm by actually doing whatever it takes, that would be, Toranaga.
because he
And we
does
see
like
that.
sacrifice a bunch of people like that he loves. You're just like, okay, dude, like you're
Yeah.
cool, but like also like, damn, man.
He's a savage. He's an absolute
Yeah,
savage. And I think that's the thing where it makes sense and I love it. And he's such a strong character. We'll talk more about the subtitles because I love that you mentioned it, which was a big talking point on the official podcast for Shogun. How many different iterations it had to go through to get it spot on. So like the subtitles that we see in Japanese that are written back to us are done through English script writers. Then that went to Japan to get Japanese translated. Then it went to a historical person to translate it into Japanese. Then from that historical Japanese back into English. So it was as close to that historical accuracy as possible, which I think is just so freaking cool. But
yeah.
Hiroyuki, just man, the stoicism, the intelligence, the way he led people on from you think he's doing one thing, but really the whole time he's doing something else. For using even his son as a point of excelling his program or his plan, like is insane to me. In a lot of ways, I mean, for me, I don't know how you guys felt, but he kind of felt like a little bit of a villain at the end. Did you guys
Yeah,
get that?
a little bit. He was like, it was like, I don't know if he was kind of like I said, he was kind of like the mastermind. You know, it was kind of like in the same way that like Ozymandias at the end of Watchmen is kind of a villain, but it's like, okay, but it's for the greater good. But like, is this ever really for the greater good? Like, it's
Yeah, but he still
complicated.
killed
And I
like
like that.
16 million people. Like,
Yeah, exactly. You know, so it's one of those things. It's like, oh, is the greater good actually like do the ends justify the means? And I love that it just kind of doesn't really answer that for you. You know.
yeah,
Yeah, I compare it to like to bring it back to Hawaii, like King Kamehameha, right? You can make the argument that all the separate islands that existed had their own chiefs, had their own ahupua'as, had their own customs, etc. And then to bring all the islands together obviously makes them stronger as a nation, and can be particularly like a peaceful kingdom because there's no longer need for war, or that feudal type system. And yet, once you become a little larger, you kind of have to think, well, am I large enough to bring myself into the larger pool of like huge countries, right? And it kind of it's an interesting take on the situation, but I thought was really well done.
yeah, definitely. It comes across that he's Minowara too, right? And
Yeah.
we get this whole idea of him versus Ishido, who's trying to rally the rest of the regions. And we know that Ishido came from a peasant background. He wasn't highborn, but that Toranaga has always been Minowara, and so because of that, he's always come from a high background, a samurai background, warriors, leaders, and man, I feel like he just does such a good job. But yeah, it definitely felt like in those situations when you are a part of a legacy like he was, or let's say the British family or Russian oligarchs or that kind of thing, it's like, is the way they think, has it been formulated that way because it's worked, it got them to where they were at? And you're right, like at the end of the day, this now launches the Edo period, and the Edo period was the greatest period of peace within the country. So yeah, it's just so interesting. But there was a part of me, I'm not gonna lie, I loved him throughout the entire show, except for in episode 9 a little bit when he let Hitomatsu, his best friend, commit
Yeah.
seppuku, which I was like, dude, that is messed up. Other than that, yeah, there was a little bit of me at the end where I'm like, this guy's a dick. But like, but so well done. So I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts on it. One of the people who was his right hand man that we haven't talked about at all, which we kind of did a little bit. We touched on it. Yobushige. Yobushige was the guy that everybody loved to hate and was just a mischievous bastard that moved a ton of things forward and created a ton of stress. But at the end of the day, has kind of become the internet's favorite. Yeah, what were your guys' thoughts on Yobushige and what were some of your highlights for his character this season? Drake, you are also muted.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No worries.
I loved Yabushige's character at first because when you first meet him in episode 1, essentially you're like, oh wow, is this what the Japans are like? Just a bunch of Japanese dudes boiling white dudes who come to the country. And we kind of see his interest in death and suffering because he's a lord, so he doesn't really have a lot to worry about, etc. And he's under Toranaga, right? At the same point in time, he also wants to have more. A lot of samurai culture really did not like the merchant status because you touched money and that was kind of impure to a degree. And you can see how greed can kind of move you away from discipline and service because samurai in general were there to serve their lords. So his growth is pretty normal for a man who is scheming and wants to be on top, but and will do kind of whatever it takes to do so in a much more sloppy, yes, less thought out way than Toranaga, but very much mirroring Toranaga's, I guess, tactics, but for a much different purpose and a much more self-serving purpose. And now you get to see kind of what happens to those in this culture that self-serve and to those who are looking for a much larger future.
Oh yeah, dude was trying to jump sides the whole season.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's Toranaga's right hand man. Sometimes he's in Ishida's pocket, and you're like, this isn't. I think we all knew it wasn't gonna go well for him, but I didn't know it was gonna go as bad, and I also didn't know where he was gonna get caught. And man, at that last episode, episode 9, where he lets the shinobi in. Oh my god, that bastard! I was like,
right.
I thought that was Crimson Sky, which I think we've talked about in the past. I don't know about you, Derek, but I was like, oh, Crimson Sky is about to go down, and Toranaga's sending in ninjas. But no, they just start stabbing everybody in the house. So, yeah, what was your thoughts on Yobushige?
Yeah, no, when we first meet him, I'm like, this guy's a real son of a bitch, like he's, he's torturing Blackthorn's crew to death, and he's just like obsessed with death, and you're like, man, screw this guy, and then he falls off that cliff, and you're like, cool, he's out of here. But then he just keeps sticking around, and kind of, like I said, he's like a bad dude, but you're kind of like, he's such a rascal. You kind of like, he's such a little goofball that you can't help but love him, and he does stuff that is just kind of like, skeevy and stuff like that. But he's always, he always feels bad about it. Like I feel like he's like, especially after like Mariko dies, and he kind of like loses a bit when he's just like trying to like catch the fish that aren't there, and then it was just like. And I love that because he brings up the moment when that we didn't even talk about when Blackthorn is teaching Toranaga how to dive, and he's like, teach me how to dive, like let's go to what's your country called, let's go there, let's go. And Blackthorn's like, dude, you are like losing it, you need to calm down right now. And then that leads into the great moment where you see that the Erasmus has been sunk. So yeah, I thought he was a really great character. The actor, and you guys are probably going to have to correct me again on this one, but
don't ask me about the pronunciation. I'll probably mess it up again.
Tadanobu Asano. He's somebody who he's another Japanese character actor that you've seen in a lot of stuff. You've probably seen him in the Thor movies, for example. He's one of Thor's like buddies or whatever.
Oh my god, I didn't even put that together. Yeah, he was one of the. What do they call
Warriors
them?
3.
The Warriors 3. Oh my god, dude. I didn't even realize that. What a veteran, man. Nice. Yes, that's right.
So, like a lot of it's just great to see a lot of these Japanese character actors getting their chance to shine in this one.
Yeah, I love that you called out that last episode because it is a total shift in his character where the whole time it is self-serving. He's just trying to make sure that he's good, that he's safe, that his head stays on its neck. And this is the first time where he loses it even in front of Ishido. And he's like, the catfish. Well, it turns out like the reason they mention that, I think, it was probably in the book, but in real life, there was an earthquake around this time period in Japan, and they had blamed it on a catfish that had pulled a part of the island that had shook Japan. So it was kind of maybe more of a meta commentary on what had happened around this time period, but he loses his shit. And I thought if Ishido must have really liked him to not just take him out right there, but it allows him to go back to Toranaga. And yeah, it kind of calls back to something he had even said earlier when Nagakado, Toranaga's son, had slipped on that rock and kind of bashed his head in, and he died that way. And he says, I think, like, that's a death worse than getting eaten by dogs. And now we're brought into this point where Toranaga's like, yeah, you gotta like commit seppuku. And he's like, dude, what if I just do this instead? He's like, nah, seppuku, and that's it. And he's like, all right, fine. Like, how do you want to be buried? And he's like, just leave my body in the field with the dogs to fill their bellies.
His death poem is so good because he's just like, let me be eaten, fill the belly of a dog. And then he's just like so proud of it too. He's like, hey, pretty good, right? Pretty
yeah. Like, hey, you didn't think I could come up with that, right? But that was all me, man. All me. That was pretty good. So, yes, I loved Yobashige in it and hated him at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think those are the elements where I could see where people will come from with comparing it to Game of Thrones. It's like there's certain characters who are just shitheads and you want them to die, and then they don't. And then there's other characters you want to live forever, make it to the end, and they don't. Like for me with Mariko.
Yeah, definitely. He felt like a character that I was like, I really wanted him to die at the beginning. As it went on, I was like, okay, keep him around, but I was like, he's got to go before the end. And I think the way he went, where he's like, like let me, Torganaga's like, all right, well, let me just tell you all the stuff so that we can kind of like explain what's really been happening this season. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah. I love his like facial expressions. He's always like, oh, like he's always doing that thing. I think it's so great. Like he's so funny.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, his natural blocking was very, very hilarious. A cause for, I to a degree, like the viewer balance, right? We can see it from this like happy-go-lucky side, and like what we would do. I would probably want to do that. I mean, I don't want to die. I don't want to leave my situation. I can try to go get this better situation. And for me, even though I grew up in the culture a little bit, to kind of see the in between, right? The things that we don't really talk about, just because that's not the honorable way. Really broadened the view of Japanese culture, not only from like a strict standpoint, but like an opposite standpoint, and then like a self-serving standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really highlights the point of honor, and I don't know if we see it as much in Western culture. There's certain things we definitely honor, watch any football game or basketball game, there's always military appreciation night and, the people that protect the country. But at that time, this was probably one of the highest honors if you couldn't become a lord. And even so much so that we had talked about, you would offer seppuku out to your lord if you felt like you stepped over the line. Not because you thought, I don't know. It's crazy. They weren't asking you to kill yourself. You would offer it as a way of saying like, I'm my bad. And that is just an insane thought. The honor system, the way that there's this politeness, the way they move in this show, the way that all of the customs are set up so that it is about honoring the highest level or whoever's in the room. Much of this was Toranaga, but I just really thought they did such a good job. And the showrunners, the creators of this had said like a lot of that was straight from historical accuracy, and a lot of things when you watch it, and I think this will be a show that I go back and watch, but they said when you watch how women move in the background or the way that they bow, all of that is so spot on and accurate. And I think that kind of even speaks to how they did things from a physical standpoint. But also what else translates in this for me is the settings and the costumes. And everything was so damn beautiful and seemed so historically accurate. Just the sets, like, yeah, I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on the settings, the costumes, and that kind of stuff?
I would like for there to be a store where I can buy all that fashion because it was so good, the intricacies in some of the kimonos that they wore under the armor and also just daily walking around, especially when it came to particular clans and also higher ranking within those clans, they were able to use a lot more brighter colors, the patterns, and then you think about, it was like what they're making that fabric in the 1500s, like that's crazy. Let's
Yeah.
have some of that now.
Yeah, one thing
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was really sick that they shout out was that in the beginning of the show, Tonaga's outfits, kimonos, everything were more pure silk, and as it went on, it was kind of like a rougher silk, so that when he needed to prepare, he would be able to tie it himself. But I'm like, what an amazing detail that the costume designers thought about. Like, that's insane. Yeah, sorry, Derek. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, like, because it looks so incredible. Like the production design on this show is absolutely next level. Just everyone, like you said, the costumes looks good. And you said they shot this in Canada. You said, or what did you say they shot
Yes.
this?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I want
that's
to say
insane to me
like,
because I would have
yeah,
I would
yeah,
have
I was
never guessed. I would have thought, oh yeah, for sure they shot this in Japan.
right. Yeah, dude. Oh my. Yeah, and that's the thing. It was supposed to be shot in Japan, but they couldn't. Again, COVID and we tried to. Crazy enough, we tried to go to Japan during this time period, like in 2021, I think, and we
In
couldn't
the
go.
1500s? No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah. We tried to use our time machine and go back to the Ichigawa era or whatever it was called. But like, um, yeah, the fact that they had to move everything to Canada, and I think it was in Ontario, and then built out all these cities and buildings where all they had to do, I mean, like they spent all this money, but also like all they had to do at the end was donate one of the buildings that was whatever, I don't know what you would call that type of architecture, but classic Japanese architecture, and everything else, the cities, the walkways, the streets, the buildings, all were created in lifelike settings. And I think they had three different cities as sets, and then everything else was digitally implanted. The buildings, the trees, the backgrounds, the scale of the armies, obviously. But I just like how the use of CGI in this show too, to kind of fill out the rest of the set, because it just looked beautiful everywhere.
Yeah, and like that's what this show does so well that more things need to do is that it really blends the practical with the CG in a really smart way. I feel like so many movies and shows now become over reliant on CG where it's like, okay, like fill in the foreground and the things that are going to be up close, the buildings that they're going to spend a lot of time in, actually build those out, but then have the things that are going to be harder or even impossible to build practically, have that be filled in with CG. That's how it should be doing. You should stitch it together rather than like, because people love to complain about CG, but CG is just another tool, and it's a tool that can be
Right.
utilized very, very, very well. It's I always bring up like Jurassic Park. It's how that's one of the early things to utilize CG. They had the big practical dinosaurs, and for the close-up shots and stuff like that. But then when it needed to chase the car or whatever, they would use a CG dinosaur, and it's the same principle here.
Yeah. Agreed. I
Yeah,
think Drake
yeah,
appreciates the
yeah.
Jurassic Park reference too.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. Uh, to your point, the CG was utilized in such a way where it just added to the atmosphere and environment, and it never really overtook
Mm-hmm.
the story or the dialogue and the things that they needed to portray. Even when they utilized CG for episode 9 for Mariko, like it was used in a way to help like enhance that situation. Because how else are we gonna see that? I mean, practical effect would have been pretty crazy, but also maybe too much for our eyes at the time. Um, and so, yeah, what
They're like,
better?
Adesawai, step in. We're gonna blow this door open.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just we're gonna
Blast
have
you
you
from
just
the
fly
back.
forward and make your face as like as dead as possible. You know.
Yeah.
And two, I just want to point out like aside from that, like this show also looks good from just like the way it's shot. Like it's shot with this really like the lighting, and then I'd be really curious to know what kind of lens was used on this because it doesn't really look like a lot of stuff you see traditionally because like it's a very soft focus, almost like the edges are like very like fade a little bit almost. So
Yeah.
looks like maybe they're using like a longer lens or something like that, where the foregrounds are very pronounced and the backgrounds are almost like ethereal. So yeah, the DP or the cinematographer, whoever, like major props to them, because this
Yeah.
looks, like I said at the beginning, looks better than most movies. And then I think it's because instead of just trying to make it look like generic whatever movie, they like really gave it a unique style and feel that looks incredible in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, series cinematography was by Sam McCurdy,
Mm.
Mark Laberter, sorry, I butchered that name, Christopher Ross, and Ariel Rutbland.
Okay,
So
very
they
nice.
crushed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, man, what a fantastic show overall. I think this episode. I mean, we talked about it every week, and it just seemed like it continuously got better. It got richer. It got deeper. It was so interesting. I know that they're not gonna do a season 2, but man, I really wish they would do a spin off. And I don't know, that would be amazing. Even if it was a whole new cast and everything. I doubt that's gonna happen. But yeah, I don't know. What other final thoughts do you guys have on Shogun?
I mean, I'm really glad that it is like it feels like the perfect place to end it. Obviously, it's the end of the book. I'm glad that there's not a season 2. I think that it could be a good spin-off because there are other books in this series. They are like set at radically different times, but with the original Shogun show, I think they did a follow-up that had like Pierce Bronson in it, or something like that. So there are 4 more books in this series that it's called like the Asian Saga, by James Clavell. So which is kind of like not a great name, but like
It
uh,
was written a while back, so
yeah,
you
The
he's
know.
like
Oriental
mid-60s.
Orient.
Yeah, it could have been worse. It could have been worse. Uh,
The Oriental era.
but yeah, I think that they're like maybe something like that. Maybe because there is another. Because I guess there's like all these like characters. There are like people who are of like the same families and stuff like that. I think like maybe Blackthorn's descendant is in one of the other novels, so you could go that route. The only other stray thought I had was a question for you guys: is Blackthorn the original weeb?
The original weeb.
Right? Like he kind of is. He's just a white guy who's just like, I love Japan culture.
Yeah. Also, he didn't really have yeah, I guess he could be,
Yeah.
but he didn't have a choice to leave either.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I let him slide,
I just kept
man.
thinking that.
Yeah, really.
Okay.
You were harsher on him than us, and I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
He's our new Tom Cruise.
Yeah. Honestly, like, no shade on that movie because I loved The Last Samurai for a
Same.
long time, but I love that it's not just about him, and I love that the role he plays in this show. So, dude, Cosmo Jarvis, man, he won me
Yeah.
over. I appreciate
He's great.
Blackthorn.
Yeah.
Good for him.
I got to
Good
see
for
him in more stuff now.
I know, definitely. I know. It turns out he's a musician too. I might have to listen
Yeah.
to some of his music.
Yeah.
Yeah, that voice is pretty unique.
He's like the new Hardy.
Yeah, I'd buy that. Dude was in shape when he was wearing like
Mm-hmm.
the paper thong thing. So that was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Well, all right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us for this special episode of Shogun. That was a ton of fun. Thank you to Derick for coming on. We'll have all of the underrated show notes, or in our show notes, all the links. And Derick, we'll let you have the final words. All you have to do is say thanks for sticking it with us.
Well, guys, thanks for sticking it with us.
All right.
Noise.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
The JoySchtick Show. The JoySchtick Show.